So yes, and Marlene is recording as well, so just letting you all know. So Kotahitanga mō te Taiao, let's just start with the name. The name Kotahitanga, tahi meaning one, and so kotahi is the act of being one, Kotahitanga is being united, and mō te Taiao, united for our natural world. And so that is the name of an alliance that operates across 3.46 million hectares in the top of the South Island, including 0.9 million hectares of ocean that surrounds us. So we are very much an island nation, and we are really have a very close relationship with our oceans, with many of our key urban areas sited very close to river mouths and or the ocean. We have, as Chris said, we're formed by 5 councils, ranging from the West Coast Regional Council, Buller District Council, Tasman, Nelson and Marlborough, and the 9 iwi that have exercised their rights as tangata whenua across these areas. And we have the Department of Conservation, but in recent years we've also been joined by Fisheries New Zealand and Ministry for the Environment. So it is a very much a co-governance approach, and this is one that was really exciting for me coming to this role as well, being able to give effect to who we are as a nation in a truly co-governance approach. The area that we cover, this is it, broken down, and I'll just check, Marlene, that did come through, didn't it? You'll give me a thumbs up, it did. Great. So we're divided into a number of areas in our original strategy, and you can see them grouped there, but this is the area that we cover. We don't cover all of Marlborough, for those who might want to wonder why it looks like that is cut off, because that is the Ngāi Tahu boundary, and that Ngāi Tahu boundary for Ngāti Kuri, who exercise mana whenua through that region, wanted to align with their work in Environment Canterbury because of their close relationship through the rest of Canterbury there. But we do have Ngāti Waiwai on the west coast as well, who also come into Tasman District. So back in 2016, the Alliance was formed, and one of the first things that it did was to produce a strategy, which has actually been around now for 6 years. It was launched at Matariki in 2019, and I was really privileged to actually be part of the working group that developed that strategy. Now, from that time, that was mid-2019. Well, there was this other thing that had 5 letters that came through in 2019, which was COVID. And as a result of COVID, oh, it's just somebody who's there who's not on mute. Could I have somebody who's not on mute just go on mute? Or are you able to make them mute? Anybody? Please just make sure you go on mute. Thank you. So that strategy in late 2019 was kicking off some work, and we had one of our early projects was in the Pelorus catchment, or the Te Hoere project, which had a financial boost at the time of quite a few million, $20 million into that catchment over 4 years to address some of the water quality issues there. As a result of COVID, a lot of the money that was coming in at that time, including for the freshwater program, then pivoted to jobs for nature. And so one of the first things that happened for the Kotahitanga mō te Taiao Alliance was to pivot to the opportunities presented by Jobs for Nature. That resulted in about $24 million of work coming into our region, resulting in jobs, a number of which was around weed control and planting restoration, For those of you living in Nelson, you will have seen a lot of the work that occurred around the Mai Tahi catchment, or Mahitahi, or Mai Tai catchment over that time. Project Wakapuaka Whangamoa, and also work that's occurred with wild and conifer control work in the Mount Richmond Ranges, and other work that's occurred across the region. So that's what happened. But we always knew Jobs for Nature was going to come to an end, as it did, with most of those projects now wound up. So it was like, well, how are we going to finance our next phase, and how are we actually going to elevate the work that we're doing, amplify the work that we're doing, to take it to the next level where we can be even more transformative than some of the work that we've seen. So I'm just, as we are at now, this is a snapshot of what we call our existing strategy aligned projects. So some of these projects are already existing. Take Project Unsoon, for example. We know that's been going for a while. The Brookwai Marama Sanctuary has obviously been around a lot longer than the Kotahitanga mo te Taiao Alliance. But when we did the strategy, these kinds of projects were seen as quite cornerstone to the work that's been going on. So a lot of work invested in that work, but then providing us with the opportunity to amplify the work and the outcomes that were envisaged in the strategy. So there's a number of other projects that are occurring there too, coming into Nelson and Tasman, including the Tasman Wetlands and Fish Passage project that was run through Tasman District Council that received Jobs for Nature funding. But also we've been able to receive other funding as well, for example, to look at wasp biocontrol across the region, which is occurring in a couple of sites in Tasman, one in Golden Bay, one up the Howard Valley, and one in Rye Valley. So there's a number of projects that already exist, but again, these projects are facing significant challenges, whether it's ongoing funding, for many of them that involve predator control, it's ongoing reinvasion from pest species as well. And why am I saying these things? I haven't yet talked about climate. And that is because a lot of what the thinking was at this time had separated out the biodiversity from the climate impacts. And one of the things that certainly my experience with the Climate Forum has been, and my work in that space, is that those things are inseparable. So knowing that that work was coming to an end, knowing that a number of these projects are facing long-term issues around financial sustainability and project viability, we embarked on a kind of process that we call restoration by design. So here's a little bit of a timeline. Established 2016, Matariki launch around the strategy. We launched the Te Hoere project. We received the Nature Conservancy, then began to partner with Kotahitanga mo te Taiao in 2020. And in 2021, we got the Jobs for Nature funding. That's really supported a lot of our projects. That work was coming to an end. So as Chris said, over the last couple of years, we've embarked on this process called our Restoration by Design process. And that has resulted in this strategy implementation pathway plan that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about over the next while. So here's the man himself sitting in the middle of the screen. We spent 8 months, 23 full-day workshops, going through what were the key issues that were occurring across our region. That was led in part by a 3-day workshop we'd had in Westport in August 2022. And from there, we determined some of the projects that we were doing. And we went through a process that's an international best practice process in conservation planning. It was facilitated and supported by the Nature Conservancy and funded in part by Rata Foundation. And so this is actually at a 2-day workshop we did in St Arnaud. And one of the work streams that was identified in that August 22 workshop was that we needed to have a specific focus on climate change, what it meant for our biodiversity, and the work that we would be doing into the future. So Chris in the middle here of Anna from Gerety from Tasman District Council and Delise Augustin from Marlborough District Council. Doing some hard work, not sure what you're doing there, Chris, but obviously something very important. I've put the slide up because I think it kind of speaks to the complexity of what we were trying to tackle. So we were looking at the really big issues that weren't just at one place or one ecosystem type, or indeed in one kind of altitude or one domain. We often think of land or marine. And instead, we were working from the mountaintops out into the sea. We were looking particularly at connected those ecosystems in our lowlands. We were dealing with a number of kind of places that are like whole places in themselves, like Bulla, for example, had a work stream happening there. We know that Golden Bay Mohua are, like working together collectively. And then we had some existing projects. We also knew that we needed to be thinking not just at the kind of invasive species, which is one of these things, but also around the people, because there is that whakatauki that you'll all be aware of. What is the most important thing of all? I say it's people, it's people, it's people. Now that, of course, speaks to the fact that people are absolutely fundamentally important in terms of looking after our natural world. It's not actually saying that people are the most important thing. It's saying that we play a vital role in making sure that we look after our natural world. So people were there, the climate change is right at the centre of it, the way we use our land. And we also wanted to make sure that we gave due process or consideration to the existing projects that are happening. And there are literally hundreds of them across our 3.4 million hectares. So we wanted to be really conscious of those, and particularly those bigger ones that are working collaboratively connected, as well as some of the key organisations. So Forest and Bird, for example, were involved in a number of these processes, bringing their knowledge across the space as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the climate change workstream and what we did. And I know this is a difficult slide to see, and I don't want you to get too worried about the specifics here. But one of the things that we did very early on is identify the types of ecosystems across our landscapes. And so that's what's written down the bottom. So we've got our air, our atmosphere. We've got our uplands, which are above the tree line, our forest ecosystems, our lakes and our wetlands, our coastal ecosystems, and our marine ecosystems. And we grouped them kind of together. And within each of those, there's different types. There's like beach forests, there's lowland alluvial forests. We know in the coastal area, there's dunes, there's estuaries. And obviously in the marine space, we go into the deep sea as well. So across all of those projects, we identified these kind of 6 groupings. And then each of those work streams, of which the climate was one of them, went through and identified some of these kind of key threats to the work streams, and then determine at what significance that particular threat was. So the redder the dot, the higher the threat impact was to that particular ecosystem. So for an example there, declining marine health was ranked as climate change was a very high causal problem to that, obviously, particularly in the coastal and marine environment. So the types of threats that we covered are the changes in the kind of biophysical threats. There are also threats around things like drought and fire, and invasive species, how invasive species spread across our landscapes. The competition that we have as humans for the space that ecosystems need to provide, and particularly thinking of this in the coastal environment, where we see a lot of hard infrastructure coming into play to protect homes or roads. At the same time, we're seeing critical ecosystems in our coastal landscapes needing to have those spaces to move. Other issues, of course, are the impacts of storm events on things like sediment and the quality of our freshwater ecosystems. The snowpack, fewer frost days, what that means for across our region. And then obviously the whole sea level rise, coastal inundation. We often hear a lot about that, but we don't often hear about things like changing breeding habits, etc., things as a result. The other group of work in there is around the people stuff. So what knowledge gaps do we have? What resourcing do we have to grapple with this? And what are people's knowledge systems about some of these impacts? So this was part of the work that the group that Chris was involved in, and Yakal Upson was actually helping lead, were involved in for our process in identifying some of those issues. What that then resulted in coming from the group was there's definitely there's two components to it. One component was to understand that the work that we were doing across all of our conservation strategies needed to be cognizant of both the impacts of climate on that particular ecosystem, but also the opportunities that restoration presents to build not only our climate resilience, but also to improve climate sequestration. Now, one of the things, of course, is building resilience. There are some things that we decided that we could control more than others. One of the most difficult things, I think, was our discussion around the marine landscape and the fact that we have warming sea temperatures and how we cannot do a lot about that here in Nelson Tasman. Obviously, globally, we need to do something about it by reducing our emissions. And we can take action at a Nelson Tasman level. But what we also know is that we need to improve the health of these ecosystems to improve their resilience to things like warming oceans and storm events. And that's just one example. Another one is the impacts of drought. So we know that drought can have quite serious impacts. But if we are actually doing work in improving the resilience of our ecosystems, then they're more likely to respond positively to events like droughts. So this, there was one thread there around working collaboratively with all of the projects that we're going to do within KMTT to ensure we built that thinking into the development of our program's work, and also to help drive some of the decisions as to where we could best have impact. The second aspect of it is the bottom part, or the thing called the triad. And this was a three-pronged approach around improving the way that we are working, particularly across our councils with the climate teams that we're often seeing working in councils, and the biodiversity teams within councils as well. But it's not just restricted to councils, although that was obviously one place that that came through, but also with the Department of Conservation, for example, with research institutes, with how we're working with Māori, how we're making decisions. So this is another particular area of focus, is for us to make sure that we've got our systems and the right systems in place. So that was the work that Chris's group produced and gifted back to the KMTT governance body, we then spent the next quite a few months working through all of this and weaving it back together into what we called our strategy implementation pathway plan. Now this is available publicly. It was available from February this year, and if you haven't seen it, we'll be able to share a link with you all that you can look it up. But if you look up KMTT and SIPP, we ended up calling it SIPP for short. If you Google that, you'll find it quite easily. Now, this is a public-facing document, but behind it sits all the work of each of those groups and an operational plan that is available for people to see. But honestly, it's 123 pages of kind of budgets and program management lines and just the kinds of things that when we looked at it, we thought we can't put this out in the public arena. It's just going to make everybody's eyes roll back into their head and they're just going to walk away from what we're wanting to achieve. So it's been distilled into the strategy implementation pathway plan, which is a 23-page document publicly available to you all, and I urge you all to have a look at it. But what I'm going to do now is kind of talk you through where the thinking has gone and particularly linking it up into those climate discussions that I was talking with you all about. I don't know how many of you are aware of Te Mana o Te Taiao or the New Zealand biodiversity strategy, but I was also really fortunate to be involved, and Derek Shaw's here too, and I know he helped advise some of that early work as well on that strategy that was released in 2020. And in that strategy, one of the things that we looked at was that we can all talk about restoring and protecting. We've all got great plans. We want to go and restore that bit of forest there, or do predator control here, or, you know, a number of those things there. And we can do great plans for that. But if we don't have the right systems in place, and if we don't do the kind of empowerment with the communities that we need, as I said before, you know, people are fundamentally important, then we just end up with words and wishes on paper. And so we really need to do two things. And that came through in the New Zealand biodiversity strategy, which is reflected in this image on the left here. So at the bottom, and we've adapted it to suit Kotahitanga because that's what we do. At the bottom, we have the things that get our systems right. And I'm going to talk about each of these separately shortly, so I won't go into any detail. But that's the tuapapa. That's getting our systems right, all the things that we need to have in place. That's the kind of behind the scenes, like if you're doing a show or something, it's making sure that you've got all your backstage stuff running well. Otherwise, the show will just flop. The next part is around empowering the action, and this is around empowering our communities. And there's typically, we have a very strong, engaged community in both conservation and climate action in our region, comparably across the country. But there's still a whole huge numbers in our region who are not engaged in this. And so we're wanting to think about how we build that engagement and how we build the capability, the capacity, the training, the resourcing. I'll go back into this a little bit more shortly. And then finally, when you've got those things and those things are happening, and it can happen at the same time, these aren't to say you have to have 1, 2, then 3. But finally, we come to what's called the Te Ake me te whakahau manu, or for us, ki uta ki tai, from the mountains to the sea, protection and restoring work. And there are 4 key areas that we've identified that are transformative, ubiquitous across our landscape, and also are ones where we actually believe that we can make a difference, and ones that our community have said are vitally important for us to make a difference. So I'm going to just reflect now that our strategy implementation pathway plan does not duplicate the good work that's already going on. There's great project work that's happening at place, and we don't at all prefer to suggest that we're going to replace that work. In fact, what we're looking at doing is how do we amplify that work? How do we bring the additional tools to make that work sustainable? How do we think about bringing the funding into it? And also, what's the transformation that might be needed to make that work sustainable in the long term? And so predator control is one of those kind of issues that springs to mind. But other things have arisen as well, and I'll talk to those briefly shortly. So let's start with getting the system right. And what I just want you to see here is two key things to this. You can have a look at the fact that we've got sustainable financing and iwi leadership and governance and operations. But critical to us was building this climate resilience into everything that we do. And we've deliberately used that term climate resilience rather than adaptation or mitigation, because for us, that means strengthening our biodiversity systems in a way that they can do both. And we know that nature and nature-based solutions are ways that we can provide both adaptive and mitigating measures in the climate change space. The other important aspect of it is around integration of our strategies. And that is particularly to make sure that the strategies that we have across our partner organisations have visibility to each other, so that the climate strategy, for example, that Nelson City Council, and hopefully you all submitted on that one, the climate change strategy and action plan released by Council had a very strong linkage with the biodiversity work and the biodiversity strategy that's happening in this region, so that those two things can be combined together. And I was fortunate to be involved as the chair of the Climate Change Advisory Group for Nelson City Council over the last couple of years as well, which has really helped to kind of bring that integrating factor into play. So these are the kind of foundational components that we think are really important to moving on. I'm going to move much faster than I thought, Chris. Okay, so the other part is empowering our action and what we need to do in this space. This is around getting more people involved, around building capability and capacity. But one key aspect of this work is making sure that we're working together. We're trying to get rid of that kind of scarcity competition that often plays out in this space and build a much more collaborative program. And one of the ways that we're looking at doing it is expanding and strengthening community connector hubs. And obviously we've been working quite a bit in Bulla, Kaiwhakahaere, with what's known as the Kaiwhakahaere Nature and Environment Communities Trust. And we've been helping them stand up. And we've been having discussions with TET, Tasman Environmental Trust, and developing an MOU with TET to look at how we can work and support the work that they're doing and integrate that work. So this is going to be one way through those hubs that we can make sure that we build that capacity and that resilience and that understanding and connectivity. And it's through these hubs that we will use opportunities for training. Yeah, I won't go into much further. I'll pick up the last few that I want to focus on a little bit now. So the four aspects that we talked about, the first is around iwi-led projects, and this is about building iwi capacity and their aspirations to be leaders in restoring. At the moment, so much of their work in this space is led by other people's aspirations and is being led by the work that they have to do in the RMA space. So part of what we're doing is helping build that capability and capacity and supporting their leadership. A big area, and this again, you'll note, relates to climate change, but a particular focus that we're taking at the moment is a focus on 840,000 hectares across Northwest Nelson. that's bounded by the Motueka River and the Buller River. And in that particular area, we are looking at how we can actually have a long-term sustained reduction in ungulates to the point where our forest ecosystems can recover. And so that body of work is being facilitated by DOC through this program, but is obviously in partnership with a number of organisations, and it currently is in a pre-feasibility stage. Restoring and connecting our lowlands, restoring our cover to 15%. I'll touch on that a little bit in a moment. There's predator-free work and the helping our native species thrive. And then there's a body of work in our marine environment as well. And I'm just going to flick through those and then I'll be done, Chris. So this here is an interesting map that was produced by the Department of Conservation for our work. Now, the purple area is the area which is priority for managing ungulates. Planned work is this pale kind of green, and then funded work is the dark green. And then if you have a look right across the area, you'll see that this Northwest Nelson was the real hotspot for it. So that's why we are focusing our efforts on this area. But another particular area is the Sounds, Marlborough Sounds. There's quite a bit of work going on there. And Mount Richmond Forest Park is just really suffering from ungulate and a lack of investment. But our aim is to work in this area as a pilot opportunity where we know it's a priority, and then being able to use tools that we can transfer out. Now, some work that we know is also going on is work on understanding what the climate, what the opportunities are for restoration of vegetation and natural kind of sequestration that our forests would then be able to recover from if we remove ungulate browse from those forests. That's something I know Forest and Bird has done research on in the past, and there is some work that's going on at the moment that's funded for us to understand what that might look like. So that's a part of that kind of the climate work also driving some of the work for restoration of our biodiversity. The second one that I wanted to talk about was the restoring lowlands work. We've got about 80 to 100,000 hectares of lowlands across our region, which doesn't seem much when you talk about 3.4. But some of it, like in the Motueka Ecological District, where the project is occurring at Snowdon's Bush, is less than 1% remaining. 0.35% of native vegetation cover is remaining. It's probably growing through the restoration efforts that have been occurring recently, but it's nowhere near the target of 15% that Manaaki Whenua Land Care Research has advised is the kind of magic number that if we reach those kind of numbers, then a whole lot of good things start to happen. We start to see the opportunity for greater resilience to climate change. We start to see improvement in threatened species, and we start to see really healthy restoration corridors. Now, some work that's going on for that at the moment, and is going to come in the next month or so, is we've been working with WSP, and we're doing a mapping project to identify within these kind of areas where those priority areas for restoration might be. And that was something that came from the community who's saying, we really want to get involved in restoration, but like, where do we start? Should I do the coast? Should we do a riparian margin? Should we strengthen the corridor here? So this model that we're going to produce will actually help catchments inform where they would get their best bang for the buck in terms of restoration efforts and what that might mean. So that's about to come out. Another key issue for this was that a lot of private landowners are quite keen to do this work, but for some of them, if it means the loss of productive land, they can't afford to. It's their productive land. They need to farm. And as most of this area is in kind of farming landscape of some sort, whether it's agriculture, forestry, or viticulture, or horticulture, we're looking at what sustainable financing mechanisms might be available. Now, obviously, the ETS is one such scheme, but we're actually looking into voluntary carbon markets with biodiversity premiums, for example, looking internationally at some of that work. And also just understanding what some of the barriers are. Some of the barriers are not financial barriers. Some of them are consenting barriers. So we're working on a study with, we're just in the process of contracting Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research to do quite an in-depth study in our region on what those barriers and incentives might be. So hopefully that's going to inform some of the work. And obviously it's not just about planting trees, it's about making sure we've got good weed control, good floodplains, reduction of sediment going into our waterways and into our oceans, and which improves a whole lot of health. So that you can see from that map, that's the area of that has got less than 5% remaining of our ecosystem. So you can see that Tasman area is obviously very much a hotspot for us, as is the Wairoa Valley. And then the last one I want to talk about is our marine area, where we've seen collapsed shellfish populations. We know that our near coastal environments are those that are most unhealthy, particularly our estuaries and our rocky shore reefs. Some of that is due to sedimentation, some of that is due to overfishing, some of it is due to just changing trophic cascade levels with fish stocks, etc. The challenge that we've often struck is that sea is managed separately to land. So part of the work that we're going to be doing is going to be integrating some of that work there. Working across a number of, down the bottom here, the regulatory, the restorative space, the industry, research, and our recreational space. And the response to that is being led by our iwi partners, particularly focused on wanting to provide a leadership in the salty space. And so there's going to be a lot of work there, but also very much connecting with that restoring lowlands and the existing work that iwi are doing in the freshwater space as well. So I'm just going to kind of finish with that image there, just saying a lot of what we're doing comes back to people. It's about listening. It's about listening to stories. It's about listening to people who we don't always talk together. And then it's about finding our ways forward together and working collaboratively to make those changes. So, Chris, I've finished my kōrero and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Debs. Boy, there was a lot, such a lot of information in there. It shows just how far things have advanced over the last 2 or 3 years with this process, and very, very encouraging to see, especially the integration of everything, and you've got some really clear priorities there. Right. So with the so we've got probably like 15-20 minutes for questions. Are there any if anyone has questions, let's think. We can I think we've got everyone on one screen. We can yeah, Joanna, I see your hand up there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you, Debs, for that very helpful overview. I've been wanting to know for a while if any native deforestation is happening in the top of the South.
That's a really good question, Joanna. And there's certain native deforestation. It's not, I mean, there's probably little bits that are going on, but it's really not the big issue now in the same way that it has been in the past. And that's stood up through work that when I was involved with Native Habitats Tasman through Tasman District Council, for example, recurring surveys would show that we are not losing any more forest, although that's not to say that there might not be some that we're losing, but it's definitely not at the large scale. In fact, we're probably growing forest at the moment more than losing forest.
Okay, any more questions? If you could put the little yellow hand up. Yeah, Catherine, I see you.
Kia ora koutou, he te tukanui kia koe, Debs, awesome mahi, and it's really great to discover it. I'm really curious to hear a little bit more about the community hubs. Some of the work I was involved in up in Tamaki Makaurau identified the importance of physical places and bringing people together around conservation. So I'd love to know a little bit more about that, and also thinking about exactly what you said in terms of that building climate resilience helps us both with reduction and mitigation. You know, it all feeds the same, and also how bringing people together makes resilience in communities.
I mean, and it's great to see you, Kath, on screen. Yeah, it's for me, that the community hubs is something that we need to work with the communities to grow. So we've already, and one of the things is we don't want to whakaiti, we don't want to belittle those that are already existing and doing good work. So we are having the conversations with the existing community hubs around what's working. For some of those, their physical space or physical projects, there's quite a few opportunities. But Kath, it's a really early stage for us in terms of developing that out. For example, in Bulla Kawatere, their hub is, they've joined with the Kawatere Cycle Trail hub, because that's where people come who are kind of interested in conservation and getting out. So it's really understanding those community needs and what each of the communities are going to need. There were some themes that carried through, and one of those themes is reflected in some of the work that Tasman Environmental Trust has been doing, for example, around building, taking away some of the bureaucracy of managing projects, really doing things like health and safety, providing opportunities for training, best practice. Like a lot of things are moving a lot of the time. So providing some of those opportunities for communities to come together, learn, train, build capability and capacity, and potentially collaborate as well. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Yeah. Thanks. Fiona, your question, please. You're muted.
Yep, sorry, just trying to unmute. And I guess in all of this, Debs, and it's an amazing mahi that is intergenerational and needs to be long-term and sustained. In all of this, we come back to that sustainable financing. How do we mobilize the resources and all sorts of resources, so human resources as well as financial resources and other resources, to get this beyond a sort of, we've got money for 12 months, we've got money for 3 years, we've got money, you know, if we're lucky, for 5 years. How do we build a community demand that says we need to fund, or we need to resource these activities that restore our landscapes in order to have a healthy future?
You know, Fiona, you've hit the nail on the head. We could do, if we had more funding, we could do things, couldn't we? You know, the more funding we have, the more we could do. There comes a limit. We actually have to train the people to do it as well. But I think, you know, that's inherent through this strategy. It is an intergenerational, and it is going to take time to get some of that change. But that's definitely one of the things that I'm looking at internationally. We've got part of our funding and resourcing strategy, and honestly, again, you know, you're hearing this kind of relatively new. We're standing that up literally as we speak. But the Nature Conservancy, for example, is leading on these different things where people are willing to pay on an ongoing basis, these kind of biodiversity premiums, for example. So it's looking at growing the philanthropic envelope, but B, it's also going to be looking at, what does it mean? For example, some of the ideas that have come through, what does it mean to live in Te Tauihu and be a part of this beautiful natural environment? So many people have moved here. What does it mean to run a business in this region? What does that mean for us to contribute back? And that's going to involve quite a strong narrative body of work that is sitting underneath our strategy as part of that driver as well. So that's a couple of aspects of it. The other aspect of it is something we're working with funders on at the moment. So we've had funding that's often come to us for 12 months to do restoration. Well, we can't restore something in 12 months. I mean, for a start, you need 2 or 3 years maintenance follow-up. So, if you're going to give us money, you've got to give it to us for 2 or 3 years to start off with. So we're trying to work quite hard with funding agencies to get them to fund differently. And to see that kind of funding commitment to give kind of security. So that's another aspect of the work. And then another body of work that I'm starting to explore is what they call projects for finance permanence. And in British Columbia, there's a fund called the Coast Funds, which is a funding that's set up in collaboration with government to provide long-term sustainable funding for work. Now, a lot of that has been led by the Indigenous communities, but there's some real gems in there. And I've been connecting up with some of the TNC people globally to start to understand what maybe that might look like here. But as I said, it's all new, but Fiona, it came through so strongly in all the workshops that we did that one of our biggest barriers is funding, reliable funding, sustained funding, and also one of the biggest problems we face in this sector is when we become money short, which we are at the moment, we all pull ourselves back into our little caves and we become quite competitive with each other for funds. And that becomes really unhelpful when you're trying to build a kind of collaborative long-term model. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to do in that space and a lot of mind thinking. And I'm just smiling that Kath's on the call because this is a language I know she speaks very well as well. So, good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for asking that question, Fiona. It's definitely front of mind.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Alison, you go now. You're muted. Yeah. Still muted. Can you unmute? Oh,
Mute.
there you are.
Oh, okay. Sorry, fumbling around there. I have the same question as I have for the forum generally, is how and when is a lot of this information going to get out to the wider public to help stir their interest in what's happening underneath their noses? And hopefully get more money and more volunteers from people who are suddenly waking up to what's going on.
I think that's a really good question, Alison, and that's a part of me bringing this to you today, and the fact that I've been talking to others, and you might say we're talking to the converted here, and there's definitely that, and I understand that, but there is within the converted, there's people understanding so they can have further conversations, but it is part of that longer term project that I was responding to in answer to Fiona's question and in part Kath's as well, that this is actually about building a bigger narrative. It's about finding those touch points where people can engage. So we've just done some work with the fishing industry to understand what their aspirations are for the environment and how they might want to participate. and we're working with a local research institute now who's looking at wanting to convert that to bringing in parts of the marine sector who are now going to potentially may want to contribute. But it's, you know, we tell stories a lot of the time. We're getting the word out through Kotahitanga. We reach out a little bit more. We talk to donors. It's a long game, Alison, and it's, I don't think the switch is going to come on overnight, but I think we can make some really positive gains. And I think, you know, the more we all engage in this, the more we can bring that to the fore. We still lag so far behind money on social investment. And I think, you know, if you look at the narratives and political landscapes at the moment, you know, who's talking much about climate change or biodiversity? There's not a lot of that in the sector. And so we know that when things get tight, you know, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people think about their personal needs first. So some of the language that we need to use, you know, it's often when things bite people that they get more interested, but at the same time, we don't want everybody to fear for their lives to give money, if you know what I mean. We want to kind of foster that kind of altruism that will give money.
And volunteer labour.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, part of what we are hoping to work on through these connector hubs is, you know, bringing more businesses involved. And that's what I said. What does it mean to be a business that's operating in this region? Does it mean that you have a couple of days a year that you know, are actually involved with a conservation project on a long-term thing? Not that you just turn up for one planting day, but you have a long-term relationship, that you talk about that in your outcomes, that you have that chance to kind of reflect and show what you do. And that's bringing in a different community. There's only so many of us with grey hairs who've often got the time to get out there and do the work. And, you know, in my 20 odd years, you know, that's who's turning up mostly.
Great. Yeah, there's some big issues, big questions being raised here. Gillian, your turn. Can you unmute? Yeah.
Right. I just wonder how we can deal with private landowners whose properties are riddled with weeds. I just feel landowners should take some responsibility. And this is in urban areas. And you've got old man's beard just growing along the roadside. Somehow they must be taught, you know, how to keep their properties free of particularly climbing weeds. There's a garden, a private property at the foot of the Richmond Hills. And over the last few years, it's become completely smothered in banana passion vine. And the banana passion vine, for the first time, is appearing all the way up to Grassy Saddle. It's at the above Hill Street. And the people who work up at Grassy Saddle have done a wonderful job over many years, but they're just having to cope with all this banana passion vine now, and it just isn't really fair. So I just feel private landowners should be more responsible. And I'm sure they can all afford a pair of secateurs and a tube of wipe herbicide.
Well, you know, Gillian, you know me, I've been a weed bust for many, many moons. So I'm just always looking for the ways. One of the things that I have found is, you know, there's power in people and power in community. And so, you know, if you've got one or two people who might be tackling the roadside, somebody stops and has a chat to them. The next minute, somebody's bringing out a cup of tea. And in some instances, it takes a community to motivate someone. Some people, they love their banana passion vines as well. But, you know, RPMPs, there's multiplicity of ways. And I'd love to think that, you know, that there was some way of motivating it. But I think it takes those multiplicity of ways, but sometimes it takes a cup of tea and a hey, how about, you know, how about we get together and tackle that old man's bed down the road or something like that. Start with a community group.
Yeah. Right. Okay. It's now just gone 8:30, so I think we need to bring it to a close. And yeah, so thanks so much, Debs. I've learned a lot, even though I was involved in this process. I've learned a lot this evening, and it's great to see how it's progressed, how it has moved forward over the last year or so, and especially, you know, the ideas, the initiatives you're coming up with around sustainable funding and so on, which could make all the difference, I think, to get that sort of longer term approach. You've got the landscape scale, you've got the priorities, you've got the projects, and if we can get the funding behind it, then I think we can do wonderful things. Yeah. So more power to you, Debs. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. It's been really lovely to see so many friendly, familiar faces, and maybe not so new faces, but just such a joy to have spent time with you all this evening. Thank you.
Thanks. Joanna, do you have a karakia for closing us off? Or?
I do.
Thanks.
It's my